In this episode, we discuss the unique dynamics of multifamily housing with a special guest, Ethan Handelman, Deputy Assistant Secretary of Multifamily Housing at the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. From zoning hurdles to community planning and balancing sustainability and affordable housing, we're uncovering the challenges and opportunities that shape the future of multifamily development.
How bad is the affordability situation in the U.S.?
There's many indexes you could look at. All of them are showing there's a real problem, but the perception of it is also way powerful. For a long time, it was very hard to get folks to pay attention to affordable housing. We're focused on housing supply and making sure that there are solutions to help improve that situation. It's going to take a lot of different things. This is not a silver bullet sort of situation. It's a recognition that our housing choices, our land use choices, are more than just our little town or our county, right? It affects everybody. And every part of the broader community we live in needs to be part of the solution. We all benefit when that happens.
I'd like to welcome everybody today to the Construction Lending Podcast. I'm your host, Sean Ferris with Land Gorilla. And today I'd like to welcome our honored guest, Ethan Handelman, Deputy Assistant Secretary of Multifamily at HUD. Before joining HUD, Ethan was Senior Policy Analyst at FHFA, which oversaw the affordable housing mission activities of Fannie, Freddie, and the Federal Home Loan Banks. He spent several years as Vice President for Policy and Advocacy at the National Housing Conference. Ethan's deep commitment to housing policy and affordability is evident through his career. His experience and expertise have made him a valuable asset for ensuring safe and affordable housing to everybody. Ethan, for all of those, welcome to the podcast first. I almost need to take my breath after that introduction. That's such an amazing career that you've had. But for those who may not be familiar, can you give us a brief overview of the multifamily side of HUD and its mission?
Sure, happy to, and really glad to be with you for the podcast today. HUD's Office of Multifamily is part of the Office of Housing. And in simple terms, we deal with apartments. We deal with rental housing, mostly owned by private entities, a few housing authorities, but generally we are helping provide rental assistance and financing, sometimes grants or other assistance to make sure that there is safe places to live for people that need it. It takes a variety of forms. There's lots of complexity, lots of old programs, and frankly, lots of old buildings that we're working to help keep in good shape and provide high quality housing.
And this is like the multifamily side of HUD, which when you think of HUD is a massive organization, and you're a piece of that. I'm familiar with the single family side, and what are kind of some of the big differences or differences in who you serve compared to, say, single family?
Sure. And, ultimately, we are serving the people that live in homes that are assisted or otherwise affected by HUD. But we also work very closely with the property owners and managers who maintain those homes and with the lenders that help provide the financing. So we have lots of customers. On the single family side, single family mortgage lending that FHA supports works very differently than multifamily. It is tied to individual borrowers, their assets, their income. When you're working on a multifamily property, it's a commercial enterprise. It's taking in rents, it's making capital improvements over time, and it's paying debt service. And so it's a different kind of relationship. It tends to be more closely engaged and just deeper in the details.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. And I always think it's kind of good to kind of take that step back and get your bearings on everything. And, I'm really excited to learn more about the multifamily side of HUD. So what are some of the recent updates on the multifamily side of HUD?
Sure. And there have been tons. I mean, since I joined at the start of the Biden-Harris administration, we have been doing a raft of things to focus on housing affordability, on adding supply with all of the tools available to us, in helping to combat the climate crisis and make our homes safer and healthier, as well as more efficient. But I'll give you two examples of recent actions we've taken. One just came out yesterday, was we updated our Federal Financing Bank Risk Sharing Initiative, which is a mouthful. But simply put, it's an agreement between HUD and Treasury that makes very low cost capital available to state and local housing finance agencies so they can make loans on affordable housing properties. We restarted this initiative at the start of the administration. We have improved it in several ways, but the most recent announcement is we added some interest rate certainty so that if one of these loans is financing, say, a new construction project, new
Okay.
construction deal, you can know when you close your construction financing a range of what your permanent financing interest rate is going to be.
So very similar, kind of like to the mechanics of like a single close, construction that converts to permanent financing, maybe with like a cap and a float down. Is that kind of like the
Yep,
mechanics to think about
it's
it?
an interest rate collar, so it's got a cap
Wow.
and a floor. Exactly. And it works just like our 221 D4 new construction sub rehab program. And yes, we talk in letters and numbers because it's HUD, but I'll translate as I go. It's a long-standing program. It is construction to perm. So you get a construction loan from us. It converts to permanent when the project stabilizes, and it's a 40-year fully amortizing loan.
Wow, that's amazing. What brought about, or what drove that change? Where does that come from? Do you listen to, what you would call your customers, and they're out there saying, hey, we're a little hestant, over the interest rates. They could go up. We don't want to get wiped out by that. It makes it unaffordable by the end if they go up too high. Who drives that?
So policy change comes in a variety of ways. This is one that came pretty organically.
Hmm.
And it took years to do. This was, believe it or not, a lot of work.
I was going to say the timing's amazing on this. Like the timing's perfect for the market.
We've been trying real hard on this one, and finally got over the finish line. I was very excited that we did. So a couple of our housing finance agency partners had been able to do something like this on their own. They would use essentially hedges, right, private hedging, to create some interest rate certainty for their participants. But you have to have a pretty big balance sheet and a lot of sophistication to do that. And many of our housing finance agency partners it's not in their toolbox. So we wanted to make sure there was something available for everyone. So we worked with them. We worked with Treasury. We worked with a lot of folks who are really knowledgeable stakeholders in the environment, and all of our attorneys who I know and love, to figure out something that can actually work.
Well, that's absolutely amazing. Everybody came together, made it happen, brought it to market. What has the feedback been so far on that?
Oh, a lot of excitement. Immediate positive reaction from yesterday's announcement. I am looking forward to seeing more agencies take advantage of it. Obviously, that takes a minute, right? You don't pick up the new documents and put them on loans on day two, but I think it'll happen pretty quickly.
Now, how does this relate to, say, mortgage insurance? Is this in this case for multifamily? HUD is actually providing the financing, correct?
No, in this case,
Sure.
it works through our risk sharing mortgage insurance. So the loan is still insured by FHA. That allows the federal financing bank, the part of Treasury, to buy the loan.
Gotcha.
The risk sharing element of it is we have an agreement with the HFA to share the risk, generally 50-50, but there are other flavors. So in the rare event that something goes wrong with the loan, they're half on the hook, we're half on the hook. Vis-a-vis Treasury, it's fully backed by FHA. That's what allows them to buy.
That's amazing. Now, you mentioned green and
resilient retrofits program.
And green and resilient retrofit program. Acronyms are.
Oh, we're terrible at acronyms. It's a great program. It's a terrible acronym, and we just own that. But it's a pretty cool thing. The Green and Resilient Retrofits program was funded by the Inflation Reduction Act. Mm-hmm. It's the only Inflation Reduction Act money that came directly to HUD, and it's all within multifamily, so that's exciting. It was $1 billion, which sounds like a lot of money. It's not, but we're making the most of it. And what we're doing with the bulk of it, more than 800 million of it, is making awards to multifamily properties that have rental assistance. So think Section 8 properties, are Section 202 housing for the elderly, Section 811 housing for persons with disabilities, programs where the federal government is paying the rent and keeping the property affordable for the residents. These retrofit loans or grants, and it can be either, are helping to those properties make improvements so that they become more energy efficient. so that they become safer in the face of natural disasters, which we know are more frequent and more severe as a result of climate change. And as a result of those two sets of changes, they're going to be healthier to live in. And we purposely designed it to move quickly and effectively for properties with a whole range of need. So some of the money is going to projects that were already planning some sort of recapitalization, some sort of rehab, and it can just add on green features. You can add solar panels, you can do more insulation, you can update your windows, right? Kind of pick from a menu and just layer it on. There's also a group, what we call our leading edge cohort, where they're going to do a complete retrofit and aim for a net zero or equivalent at the end. So they're going to make sure that at the end of all of their renovations, that property is not adding carbon to the atmosphere. And there'll be a whole bunch of other positive things about it, right? Because it'll be fully renovated. And then there's the biggest group, our comprehensive group, that come into us, they demonstrate their need, they get selected, and then we help them figure out where they can make the best changes, both on the resilient side, so safer in the face of natural disasters. That might be floodproofing or dealing with fire risk, dealing with wind and storm, you name it, and on the energy efficiency side, making that building, that part of our built environment, better to live in.
Now, when you say you help them, and I've dealt with the single family side of HUD before, and the word help, I want to kind of focus in on that. You're looking at a project, like you're actually involved, talking to them, making suggestions type of help, or what does that look like?
So in this case, it's pretty structured. We have a number of I'll use the term consultant because years ago I used to be a consultant. But companies that we have selected through our procurement process who can go be advisors and help determine the scope of work, figure out where the dollars will go furthest. And the comprehensive section of the program is set up so that if you do more, we pay more. Right? It encourages people to make the most of the opportunity up to limits and within all of the program guidelines. But it guides them, especially for owners who may not have done an energy audit of their property, may not have scoped out a full rehab, helps them do the due diligence you need to enter into a comprehensive retrofit.
All of that, excuse me, is all of that covered, with the money is the, what do you call it? The, not code review, the energy report.
Yep.
Included, and the improvements are all covered. So, if I was going to develop or retrofit a multifamily building, all of that can be covered and I wouldn't have to pay anything, or am I just getting a discounted interest rate for that? How does that mechanically?
So it's a loan or a grant to cover the improvements to the property. For many of these properties, the owner will likely also be doing a refinancing and probably making some other improvements. There is, we want them to have some skin in the game, but for the most part, we're paying for the improvements. The due diligence is also covered. We worked closely with congressional staff and members of Congress when the bill was being drafted, and they were really forward-looking about it. There is a separate line item that covers those multifamily assessments, we call them, so that if you own a property and get selected, we will make this happen.
How long? You said $1 billion wasn't a lot of money, and I can see why. How long do you expect that to last?
So we have already awarded well over $700 million in awards already. Keep in mind, the Inflation Reduction Act was signed in August of 22. Within a year, we had our notice of funding opportunity on the street, and we're taking applications. We are now past the point where anyone can apply. We're finishing out evaluating the last 3 rounds of awards and expect to make more announcements pretty soon. But this money is moving out the door very quickly.
And this seems something like could be quantified at the end of the day. You can add up all the improvements. You've got the energy reports. Hey, here's a proof of concept of how that money can be impactful towards climate change.
Exactly. And there will be an evaluation of the program as part of what we're doing. Our colleagues in policy development and research at HUD are already in the early stages of putting that together so that we can really quickly say, look, here's what is possible. We've already had some closings. So not just awards, but loan closings, which means money's going to work and improvements are happening. It's kind of light speed. And part of the reason we were able to do that was an all of HUD effort. This like I love to take all the credit for multifamily, and we did most of the work, right? But from the very beginning, the Office of the Secretary said, hey, we are going to make sure this program works right. And we have had consistent support across all aspects of HUD, all the different offices, back office, front office, you name it, to make sure that if there was a barrier, we figured out what it was and we cleared it. And it shows what's possible.
Why do I get the feeling that things are moving a lot faster at HUD? Like, even since the podcast started right here, I feel that, just in some of the conversations that we've briefly had, it's, hey, here's a problem. Let's go fix it. It's not taking a decade and you're missing the window of opportunity and the housing cycle completely passes. It seems like you're moving a lot faster. Is that something people have noticed?
We're doing the best we
or?
can. We're working hard, working long hours, trying to get it done. We know there's real need. I mean, the housing affordability challenges in this country have been getting steadily worse for a long time. I've been in this business more than 20 years. You gave a very thoughtful bio, but I'm old, right? There's gray in my beard. And I've been seeing it happen. The gap between people's income and the cost of housing, whether you're renting or buying, that gap has steadily grown. And there's lots of reasons for it, but we know the need is there. And that's why we're focused on, I gave a couple examples, but we're focused on housing supply and making sure that there are solutions to help improve that situation. It's going to take a lot of different things. This is not a silver bullet sort of situation. This is a problem long in the building, and it's going to take a lot of changes in policy and just in practice to make it better, but we're doing all that we can with the tools available to us.
Well, let me ask a dumb question, and it's one that I personally know the answer to is, how bad is the affordability situation, or how bad do you perceive the affordability situation in the U.S.?
In my more than 20 years in this field, I have never seen housing be at such a high visibility level to so many places and so many people in this country. We can look at lots of indicators. We could look at rents relative to income. We could look at house prices relative to income. There's many, many indexes you could look at. All of them are showing there's a real problem, but the perception of it is also a powerful indicator. For a long time, it was very hard to get folks to pay attention to affordable housing.
Yep.
There was this perception that's just for a few people who don't have a lot of money. Everyone else can generally make it work. Or you get whatever housing you deserve because you can afford it, was sort of the perception that people had. We know that's wrong. We know that safe, stable housing is out of reach for way too many people. And we know we need to make that better, but it's going to take a whole lot to change the many barriers that exist. HUD's taking a few steps with the tools we have. We also recently made some announcements about our PRO housing. This is one of our good acronyms, Pathways to Removing Obstacles, PRO housing, which are grants that our community planning and development part of HUD is doing to states and localities that are removing obstacles, that are making creative and effective changes to undo patterns of exclusion and limitation that have been there way too long and that are making our housing costs higher.
Wow. We had California Senator Josh Newman on the podcast, and, he kind of took us through the state of California's, housing situation. And he talked about the carrot and the stick, and how traditionally California has used the stick and it hasn't voted too well. The results aren't there. With that kind of carrot approach that you're talking about, providing an incentive, are you seeing a more positive response to that? Are communities wanting to take action when there's a carrot versus, hey, here's a penalty that you're going to have to pay if you don't meet these affordability standards?
Sure. And yes, I mean, people love carrots. They work. You don't reach everywhere with carrots. And some of our affordability challenges are based in long-standing patterns of exclusion that go back to the days of segregation, that was, explicit legal segregation in this country. And we still see de facto segregation in a lot of places in this country. You cross those railroad tracks and you know which side of town you're on.
Mhm.
Everybody's experienced that. It shouldn't be a surprise. And that really could change. That there is potential for that. There are local land use restrictions. There are all sorts of policies, particularly at the local level, that maintain and reinforce those patterns of segregation, and also limit the ability of housing markets to provide the housing that people are demanding. Right,
Mhm.
the vast majority of this country, most of the land that is residentially zoned, is zoned for single family homes on pretty large lots. That's the only thing you're allowed to build. It's often called exclusionary zoning. That means there's a lot of demand that isn't being met, where, hey, you could put a duplex or a triplex, something a little denser, but still in, fitting with the neighborhood, and, really looks nice. I've seen a lot of great examples of it. But you can't do it. There are a few places that are experimenting with making that change, and I hope more will, to really have inclusionary zoning and
Mhm.
allow more forms of housing to be built, to allow multifamily to be built in more places. You go to a lot of towns, a lot of cities, a lot of counties in this country. There's a very small part of that area where you can build an apartment building, very small, and it's expensive and it's slow and it's tough. It is always a miracle to me when a multifamily project actually comes together, because I know what a developer has to go through. You have to weave together multiple funding sources. They have to deal with all sorts of challenges from abutters or folks who just maybe wouldn't like apartments or would like them somewhere else, not here. Um, when a developer accomplishes that and gets all the sources together, makes the deal work, and is able to break ground, it is a minor miracle every time, and it shouldn't be that hard.
It is, and when we think about this broader affordability crisis in the U.S., what if you had to say, hey, this is the number one and maybe even the number two challenge that or obstacle that we see in solving this problem? What would you identify those as being?
So it's a good question. It's one where I will resist saying, "Hey, here are one or two things," because in order to solve our housing affordability challenges, we're going to need to do a whole lot of things.
Mhm.
It's not going to be one or two. Um, Exclusionary patterns at the state and local level are certainly big. Um, there are also, capital availability challenges, especially right now. Interest rates are higher than they were. The development costs are higher than they were. It is a tough time to do multifamily development. And we are working with all of the tools available to us to try and change that. One big cost driver right now is insurance. We
Mhm.
are hearing nationwide, and have been for quite some time, that costs are doubling, tripling, even more of normal coverage, or there are places where you can't get coverage, or there are insurers who are asking questions that give me a lot of pause. Things like, are you affordable housing? Do you have Section 8? I have even heard, and this was secondhand, what sort of sports do the residents play? Do they play basketball or hockey? And I'm like, we all know what code this is, right?
Mhm.
This is not a hidden thing. And we need to work on all of these aspects and more, to make sure that we are building enough housing for the need, that we're building it in ways that will last in the environment that we know is changing, that will be sustainable, that will be safe, that will be healthy to live in, and will be energy efficient. Because if we keep doing the same stuff we've been doing, we know what the result is. We're living it.
Well, how do we, I understand, you had exclusionary patterns. You had,
Mhm.
financing of the developments, and that could be to high interest rates. Maybe it's the trend right now. It could come down in the future. We don't know. Rising insurance costs being kind of like the top three that came to your mind. When we think of solutions, we usually save this question towards the end of the podcast. But hey, if you could snap your fingers and change something, genie in the bottle concept, you get a wish, and this wish pertains to housing. One change, what would it be?
Well, I'll wish for more wishes, and I'll say some of the stuff I would change is, let's say we eliminated a lot of the barriers to creating new housing in the places where there's demand for that housing, right? Where if you have the funds and can build it, you're allowed to build it. We also need the funds to build it. So our green and resilient retrofits program, like I said, we've awarded most of the funds. We're going to finish awarding it very soon. We already have a long waiting list. There are a whole lot more existing affordable housing projects that could benefit from this funding. So with more money, we could do more. Um, Capital availability broadly is another area, and we're working on ways to make our FHA mortgage insurance more effective. I think there's always a need, especially for affordable housing, for more gap financing, right?
Mhm.
The gap between the mortgage that your regulated low rents can pay and the total development cost of building the building, right? There's a gap between those two numbers. And so sources from HUD, from the low income housing tax credit, from other sources go to fill that gap. We need more of that gap financing to do it. We also need a whole lot more privately financed, privately owned, unassisted, just rental housing. Because if there is more supply, we will see a moderation of those affordability challenges. And so we're trying to do all of that in.
Yeah. How do we know when, this is one of my favorite questions, but how do we know when we've won this affordability crisis? When does it not become a crisis and we can all celebrate and throw a party and get really excited about the accomplishment?
It's a great question. Before you reserve a room for the celebration, I think the primary indicator I look at is the gap between incomes and housing costs, whether that's rent or home ownership costs of mortgage plus upkeep and insurance and all the taxes and all of that. Those two have been diverging for a long time, right? Rents have been rising faster than incomes for a very long time. When those start to converge again, then we'll be on the right track. I don't think this is going to be we make a bunch of changes and in a year it's fixed. This was a long time building. It's going to take a lot of work to fix it. But the way to know that we're going the right direction is, the old phrase, the rent is too damn high,
Mhm.
when the rent doesn't feel quite so damn high. And a lot of that you can see in the numbers, right? Because we know what median incomes are. We know, generally speaking, what rents are. But you can also tell it in how people feel about it. Are
Mhm.
they struggling? Is paying for their housing consuming all of their available excess income? I mean, we say that housing is affordable, sort of by definition, if you're paying less than 30% of your income. There are millions of renters paying more than 50% of their income for rent.
Mhm.
And the old saw is the rent eats first, right? Because you need a place to live. Um, it's also why housing affordability is directly connected to homelessness. When you have households who are on the edge of affordability, who are paying, 50, 60% of their income for housing, it's one flat tire, it's one medical emergency, it's one household, unexpected challenge that can push you into, hey, I can't pay the rent and I end up homeless. And it is much cheaper to keep people stably housed than to help them exit from homelessness. We're working on great solutions for that and have been making real headway. But we know both parts of this, the housing affordability and the response to homelessness through services and housing first and all of the actions we take through our continuum of care programs, need to work together.
No,
That
that
was a
makes
long answer that went in a
no, no, no,
strange
no.
direction.
It makes a lot of sense, and I would have these little follow up questions for you, and you'd go ahead and answer them. So those were absolutely great. You did say that, hey, this is not something we're going to snap our fingers and it's going to be done in 1 year, one administration. This is a multi-decade problem that we're trying to, I would say, make less worse for our next generation. My kids will have housing affordability issues. I've just come to that conclusion. It's, if we can lessen that impact, I think that would be, a great step in that direction. Is how long, well, it's almost like, do you really believe this is a solvable problem? And if so, what kind of ballpark range do you think we're really talking about till we can celebrate?
This is a solvable problem. If we all work together and make all of the changes that are needed, we can get on top of this. And part of the motivation goes to the framing of your question. I would like to live in, and I'm sure you would like to live in, a place where our kids can afford to live here too when they grow up and leave the house. A lot of folks don't have that right now. Certainly where I live in Montgomery County, it's a very much an open question whether my kids will ever be able to afford to live here. It's true in a lot of places, especially places that have a bunch of jobs and opportunity and are places where people want to live. Um, will it be next year? No. Do I have a prediction on, how many years? Not a prediction that's worth anything, but a lot depends on having the collective will at the federal level, at the state level, at the local level to make the changes that are needed to allow more housing to be created to meet the demand organically, to have more funds available to help people whose incomes just aren't there yet and need the help to afford it, but also more capital availability in private markets to make sure that anyone who can pay the good rent that can support construction of an apartment building, that building can get financed. And anyone who can, afford enough to pay for a mortgage, that mortgage capital is available and that home can be built and they can buy it. So it's going to take a lot, but it is totally doable.
You mentioned, when I asked the, snap your fingers and make a big change. The two things that I heard out of that was, the red tape and more funds, right? Removal of red tape, make it easier to actually do it, bring a house to market or bring a multifamily project to market, and having the capital available to make that happen. And when I think about those two solutions, what comes to my mind is kind of like this balance of, hey, we need to solve this affordability thing, but we also have climate change, which that does not come free, right? And solutions there are costly, and you have to balance apply the right resources to the right solution to get the highest impact with the least amount of cost, because a lot of this stuff is financed over time. So that balance brings me to a question. And earlier this year we had the new energy code mandate, and NHAB, the National Home Builders Association, has been a big advocate of what this means, because I think currently there's 5 or 6 states that meet the 2021 code, and other states have to upgrade to the 2021 code. And I think a lot more have. We've talked offline, a lot more have since then. Some citing that's going to take them a decade just to come to that code. Some may take a little bit longer. Studies by the NHAB, National Home Builders Association, if I can get the acronym right, I'm off on my acronyms today, says, hey, it's going to take 90 years to pay back some of these improvements. And they're really making this strong argument to how this is going to impact the supply of housing, right? So that balance of affordability to climate change, how is that being managed in your administration?
So it's a good question. I will say I differ a bit with the sort of zero sum trade off description of it, because a lot of what we're trying to do and what, frankly, the federal statute requires us to do is make sure that homes that are built today are ones that are going to last and ones that are going to respond to the changing climate that we know is happening, the need for energy efficiency. Prior to our action of adopting the 2021 IECC and the 2019 ASHRAE standards, we were on the 2009 standard, even though federal law requires HUD to periodically evaluate and update those standards. It hadn't been done. And so we were faced with the choice of, hey, do we not make a change and stay on those 2009 standards that we know are wrong, right? We know are out of date. Or do we update to the 2021 and 2019? The 21 are for single family and low rise. The 2019, the ASHRAE, are for high rise multifamily. Many states are actually already moving towards that 2021. Others are on a somewhat slower path. But it was clear to us that both on the math of, hey, what are these changes going to require in terms of cost and what's the payback, and on the very real climate need, that the choice was very clear. Especially on the multifamily side, the payback is very fast for those upfront investments. In some cases, it's investments that you would make anyway. You would build to this construction standard anyway. It's not much of a push beyond that. But the payback in terms of energy savings is very, very fast. And this is all in the Federal Register notice that we published adopting it and responding to the many comments we got. And we got a wide range of comments. We've had a lot of engagement from the National Association of Home Builders and their members. We've had a lot of engagement from folks who are focused on the environmental impact of it, a lot from folks who were just focused on the affordability of it. And it was very thoughtful feedback. We're required by law to respond to all the comments, which we did. So highly encourage folks to read the Federal Register notice. It is great reading. Might cure your insomnia, but it's good reading. But the numbers really are pretty clear. And I'm sure we disagree a little bit with the home builders and their analysis at various points. But we also know, and I have talked to developers who have built properties to this standard or higher. I've talked to developers who have built net zero housing, which means it is not adding any carbon to the atmosphere. And it is producing whatever energy it needs to run the building. It's possible to do. If we don't do it, right, if we keep building the same stuff in the same places in the same ways that we have, we know what's going to happen. We see the effect of storms. We see the effect of climate change. So the choice for us is, how do we make sure that our built environment that consumes so much of the energy we use as a society is part of that solution? And that's what this change means. And it is just for new construction. We know there's a lot of older housing that needs to be updated. It's why we have that Green and Resilient Retrofits program. It's why Treasury is putting out tax incentives to renovate older homes. It's why the EPA is putting out money for renovation and retrofits of older homes in a variety of ways. We know there's a lot that needs to happen there, but with the new stuff we're building, let's build for tomorrow, right? Because any building we build today, and you've seen it, yes, its expected useful life is 40 years. We know it's going to be around longer than that unless something really bad happens. And we want to make sure that those newer buildings are ones that will be part of the solution and good, safe places for people to live.
Yeah, and I'm going to get into a little bit of the weeds on this one. I'm not sure if you'll be able to answer it, but for states that have not brought the code up to the 2021 or 2019 standard, depending on multifamily or single family, what options do home builders have or developers have if the state is not at that code? Is this something they can go engage a consultant to provide an energy report or an architect to sign off saying, hey, it's going to be built to these standards, it's proposed to be built to these standards, I guess you would say at that time. But how do they meet those requirements if the state is not already there?
It's a great question. And obviously, it's easier for us if the state is already there and they can just point to, hey, it meets the state code, therefore it meets the FHA requirement and everybody's good and there's a little less paperwork. But if you're not in that situation, we purposely have set it up so that there can be a certification, backed with, as you say, a professional of some kind, to say, yes, here's the standard we're meeting. It qualifies for the FHA mortgage insurance. So we recognize that there will be that period of time where not every state code is there, but we want to make sure the FHA financing can work in a variety of environments.
That's absolutely amazing, because we're talking about like a proposed, hey, I promise to build it to these standards in order to get the financing. Is there any kind of follow-up to make sure it's actually built to that standard, post completion?
Sure. And I'd have to dig into the specifics about it. There is a certification by the developer that, yes, we did what we said we're going to do. This is not a situation where we're sending out inspectors to look at every building. There's just some real practical limitations there. But yes, there is a certification that we did what we said we're going to do.
Do you find the challenges of weighting the environmental concern versus housing affordability, is that a constant balance that you have to look at? Do you put one before the other, or do you try to operate within the, hey, we got to prepare for tomorrow, so if it doesn't fit in this environmental framework, we really can't go outside of this. Everything's got to fit in this boundary first before we focus on affordability. Is it prioritized ahead of affordability, behind affordability at the same time? How do we think about that?
It's not quite as zero sum as you're describing, which is fair because a lot of people think of it that way. But The newer construction techniques, the more efficient buildings, better insulated buildings, ones with energy generation on site, um, are really efficient to operate. It really lowers the costs, and that can make the affordability picture very different, both for the developer who's building the building and having to finance it, but also for a resident who has to pay the electric bill. They have to pay the heating bill. They have to pay. If you are not burning a bunch of coal in order to heat your home all winter, and are doing it with you know good insulation and a pretty small heating bill overall, it really changes the affordability picture. So it is not really a zero sum where it's like, okay, we're only going to do this at the expense of the other. It's we can build efficient and affordable homes, and that's what we need to be doing.
No, that's amazing. You mentioned earlier, we kind of touched on this topic of exclusionary zoning and its kind of historical content. Race in housing from its very early conception, how that may be morphed. Today we have, anti-discrimination laws. If I'm a developer, I never want to get sued, right? And there's laws to protect people against that. So we really don't think that, hey, racism may be as prominent in housing as it was back in, my grandparents' era, per se. How has, exclusionary zoning, even morphed in today, what that looks like, its impact on different races? How does that look like today? I know we've had some kind of interesting off-camera conversations about this, but I'd like to hear your opinion on what that looks like and what people should know about it.
Sure. And we don't see the explicit discrimination that we saw prior to the Fair Housing Act, where there were restrictive covenants on land that said only people who looked a certain way or believed a certain way could buy a home here. Um, but we see all sorts of challenges of housing discrimination still. And some of them are really entrenched by those patterns of land use and other restrictions that kind of freeze housing in the same place it was in the 1950s. That's a problem. Our work at HUD on fair housing encompasses a wide range of challenges of discrimination. Some of it is around race, some of it is around religion, some of it is around sexual orientation and identity. Some of it is around disability access and making sure that we're not creating structures that only folks who can walk around easily, like you and me, can access. And that has all sorts of implications that we try and work through all the time. But our efforts are ongoing. You may be aware of the PAVE initiative around appraisal and valuation that Secretary Fudge, before she retired, initiated here, and we have continued at HUD to make sure that we're not inadvertently reinforcing bias in how we value assets. Because we know there are examples where basically the same house with different occupants gets valued differently. That's a problem, right? It affects the financing, it affects who can buy at what price, all of it. So there's a lot of work still to be done, even though there isn't explicit legalized discrimination in the way there was, prior to the Fair Housing Act and before. There's still a lot. Like I said before, when you cross the tracks, you can tell, and that is an indication that our work isn't done yet.
How do you think about, when we think about something being zoned, right? So I think about community planning, planning departments, zoning departments, highest and best use. This area is going to go for single family. This one's 2 to 4 units, multifamily, commercial, different asset types. A lot of that planning is important for traffic reasons, important for, tax revenue, important because the person driving it or asking for the land use change is a developer wanting to profit from it.
Yep.
How does, and I think most people would think about that as community planning or some sort of planning, step. But when we talk about exclusionary zoning and how zoning a piece of land for single family becomes exclusionary, right? That term exclusionary housing and that concept. How does that work? And how is that, you know, um, today looked at as a negative practice when it comes to, or how does it become a negative practice, or how does it become exclusionary zoning?
So it's become exclusionary over time. It's when a large section of a county, say, or a town is marked as only single family homes, only on 2 acre lots. you've excluded a whole lot right there. It doesn't
Mhm.
say exclusionary in the zoning law, but that's the effect of it, and it prevents organic change from happening. The places where I have seen the most effective planning to help create more sustainable communities, one that respond to all of the needs of all of the citizens of the community, is ones that have a really inclusive process, so that the voices in that planning process, helping to come up with the zoning laws, helping to deal with the zoning board or the other choices that county or town government are making, has everybody involved, not just current homeowners, not just developers who want to build, but also residents who are paying rent, residents who are focused on pedestrian safety. Some of the planning choices around how we do not just housing but transportation affect how safe it is to cross the street. That matters, right? We didn't used to think we sort of assumed that, oh, yeah, some number of people are going to die in a traffic accident, which probably will always be true. But we can design for zero death. It is possible. And some places are doing it.
At what cost?
Well, right, and that's why having a really inclusive conversation and process helps a community balance those costs.
How does
There's an old joke
yeah.
that my family makes fun of me for saying because they don't think it's funny. But what's the difference between a developer and an environmentalist? Well, a developer wants to build a cabin in the woods. The environmentalist already has a cabin in the woods.
That's great.
Right. See, right. Housing
That
folks
is
are like,
so
yes, it's
great.
funny. Yeah.
Well, here, how do we, as a community member, how do I distinguish the difference in exclusionary zoning? How do I know that and may become a better informed citizen that this is exclusionary and this is just great planning?
Well, right, and folks will disagree about that. So the best way, just as an individual, is go to the planning meetings. Those
Mhm.
are in most communities open meetings. They're posted, and there are folks in the planning department who do a generally pretty good job of explaining, hey, here's what we're doing. Here's where we'd like your input. They'll have a list of questions. They can show examples of, hey, here's what we're hoping to achieve with, say, this transportation corridor where we're redesigning it, or this section of town where we're thinking of changing the rules. Um, Go to meetings where folks are applying for those variances or those special approvals to do a project. Learn what's going on and think about it. And if everyone does that, if we're all fully engaged, we're going to get to more equitable outcomes.
When How would I identify if I'm going to that planning meeting, and you'll see where I'm going here?
Yeah.
How do I identify something's not right? This is exclusionary versus, because what I hate for that term to be is I don't want the term to be weaponized. And I want
Sure.
somebody to know, like, no, that's not exclusionary housing. It may look like that because it's 5-acre parcels for single family, but it's counterbalanced with this and it had community input. Like, how do we identify when that term is appropriate?
Yeah, and it's I won't speak for everyone who uses a particular word, and one thing I've learned in housing is there's no magic word for the right way to describe something. It's really getting into the details and say, all right, if this were the rule that my community is adopting, what will the housing picture look like?
Mhm.
How many homes can there be? Will there be enough to meet the demand? Will there be enough community services and appropriate transportation and all that's needed? And those are organic decisions. Those are things that every community needs to figure out itself. I'll give you an example, though, from Massachusetts, where they made a policy to really help set those local decisions in a broader context. It's called their 40B law, because again, talking numbers and letters. But what it says is if each community in Massachusetts isn't meeting its minimum share of affordable housing, minimum percentage of units that are affordable at particular income levels, then developers can override local zoning restrictions as of right.
Wow.
It's been pretty effective.
Wow.
Not perfect, but it's been pretty effective. And it's a recognition that our housing choices, our land use choices, are more than just our little town or our county, right?
Mhm.
It affects everybody. And every part of the broader community we live in needs to be part of the solution. We all benefit when that happens. If there's more and better affordable housing options everywhere, it means people don't have to travel as far to work. The person who's serving you coffee or washing your car doesn't have to commute 2 hours by 3 buses to get there, which means traffic's less for all of us, which means we're burning less fuel or electricity or whatever to move people to places. It means we can live closer to where we work and study and go to church and build our lives. And that's better for everybody.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. Thank you for that. I know it's a really tough subject for a lot of people to really dive into and to understand, especially around exclusionary zoning. I'm just fascinated with that one right now. So I really appreciate this. Ethan, thank you for being on the podcast today. This is absolutely fantastic. If people wanted to get in touch with you or learn more about any of the subjects we talked about today, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
The simplest way is go to HUD.gov. You can find my email address. You can find HUD.gov/GRRP. We'll tell you all about Green and Resilient Retrofits program. Like all the information's on the website.
All right, fantastic. Thank you so much for being on the podcast today, Ethan. It was an absolute pleasure, and look to have you back sometime soon.
Thanks so much. It was great for me too.
This podcast is intended for educational and informational purposes only and does not replace independent professional judgment. Land Gorilla Inc. makes no representations, warranties, or promises for and disclaims any express or implied warranties related to content. Before acting on any information, you should consider the appropriateness of the information as it pertains to your unique business needs.